All right, welcome back. As you've seen that Mr. Lanre Arugundade joins us next. He is the Executive Director, International Press Center, as we discuss the World Press Freedom Day. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program. Yes, it's World Press Freedom Day 2024. I mean, before you come to the environment theme for this year, just take us down memory lane for a bit, if you will. The previous ones, I mean, yes, it's fundamentally meant to at least point attention to different agencies, institutions, government for the challenges and why certain things need to be done right. So from a few years ago till today, the previous scenarios that we've had on Press Freedom Day, calling attention to them, do you think we've made progress? And what would you make of it, if at all we have?
It's quite unfortunate to say that we've not made much progress. We have not really made progress. And in some instances, it seems as if we are retrogressing when it comes to press freedom or even freedom of expression in Nigeria. And in a short while, we will be releasing some data because we're having a World Press Freedom Day program here at IPC in conjunction with Media Rights Agenda and Center for Media and Society. And collectively, we've documented instances of attacks on journalists. IPC alone has documented about 44. Apart from, this was the year 2023. But even as we speak, recently we knew what happened with a journalist, Segun Olatunji, who was, detained, was arrested, was chained, was detained, and also chained in detention. And the kind of scenario that we used to experience under the military. So when you look at instances like that, you really wonder whether those, in government really want the media to hold them accountable for their actions, and whether they are prepared to follow the due process, the rule of law, where they believe that journalists have erred. The allegation against Segun Olatunji, for example, is that he published a false story. And for us, we're not in defense of publication of falsehood by anybody. But what we say is that where such is the case, there are mechanisms to address that. We have institutional mechanisms. The media in Nigeria has actually put together a complaints commission that even has representative of the government. We have the law courts that has the right to look into cases of defamation, libel, and the rest of them. So we worry that increasingly those in government do not want to follow these processes, and that is a major concern. And I'm sure later today you are going to get information about the Press Freedom Index across the world. Obviously, Nigeria is not going to rate very well on that index because of instances like this. So for us, we haven't seen the kind of progress we should see. We are really worried about this, and we believe that something should be done.
What is your mindset about the theme, a press for the planet? Incidentally, I see behind you that it looks like that. I was wondering, what's going on? Why you didn't choose this? So
what's going on? Yes, I know. Because usually World Press Freedom Day, you want to talk about journalists in danger, journalists in war, Palestine, Gaza, and the rest of them. Quite interesting, really. But I think it's so this theme, and the theme was chosen by UNESCO.
Okay.
The idea of World Press Freedom Day is a UNESCO's idea, even though the history started in Africa. Following a major media conference in Namibia, Windhoek, Namibia, in 1991. But that is just by the way. Now, this theme is one, a wake-up call on the media to pay attention to the environment and environmental justice. At the same time, it is a celebration of journalists who have used their tools to talk about the challenge of the environment. And that is why, the theme goes further to say that this story must be told. So UNESCO is also launching a This Story Must Be Told campaign, where essentially they are saying that we in the media should even not think that we are safe. As a matter of fact, there are those who have also accused the media of contributing to environmental pollution. They say that the tools and equipment that we use are part of emissions, are part of pollution. So the media is not that on mute, but they're really talking about the dangers. And so today, UNESCO is actually recognizing the works of photographers that have used their tool to tell these stories. There is one, for example, called Mehdi, Mehdi, who has really gone around the world. And one of the photographs that is being exhibited is a photograph of a young girl that is peeping from the window in Indonesia looking at a flood. And what is the story behind that? The story behind that is that it is projected that by the year 2050, thousands of islands in Indonesia, including Java, where the capital is located, are likely to go underwater. But if you are thinking that this does not affect us in West Africa, it's a joke. Studies have also shown that 31% of the population in West Africa, and particularly the commercials, the businesses and so on, live in the coastal area. So you're talking of the likes of the Govt refinery, the Lekki Free Zone, and so on. These are coastal areas, and it's also projected that by 2050 or thereabouts, the coastal areas of West Africa may actually go underwater.
Yeah.
So that would also affect the media. So in a sense, they are trying to say that we're not telling those stories enough.
Okay.
And the linkage with press freedom now is that when we now tell those stories, those in government must recognize that we're doing so because we want to save the planet, and they should not come after us. So we ask questions. We ask whether there's environmental impact assessment of the Lagos-Calabar Highway, for example. We ask, all those questions. When there are floods and we raise these things and we publish it, it's not to embarrass any government. It's to say that, look, we face real dangers and we are not paying attention to that. So for me, this is the significance of the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day.
Yeah, because I was even going to also ask you if, at the point where you spoke about West Africa, I was going to ask, look, if journalists, back home here, localizing this, if we are able to properly internalize that and then report that enough to the extent that we focus rightly on those matters, because we know how the climb here operates. Sometimes, political stories hog the headlines a lot. They relegate some of these other issues that affect human lives to the background, and then it doesn't get enough spotlight. And so I was going to ask you, look, if we're focusing enough on those issues to the extent that we understand the essence and then make sure that if they're embarrassed, so be it. Because, if they're embarrassed enough to take action to save human lives, then it's a good thing. So,
I do not think we're focusing enough, quite frankly. And Chamberlain, you need to go to the hinterland, really. Go to places where some of us, grew up. And I think Ayo was making the point somewhat earlier in your earlier conversation when you were doing this paper review about the environment. You have high-level deforestation going on in parts of Southwest, at least that I'm familiar with, that we used to have, forest reserves. These have implications for people's means of livelihood. We recall the environmental pollution in Ogoniland, in all those places where people are no longer able to farm, where people are no longer able to fish as a result of the pollution of environment. How about mining? Do you know that a lot of illegal mining is going on across Nigeria? We report this in terms of, these people have come, they are stealing our wealth, they are taking the money. But we are also not talking about the fact that a day will come when you will have collapse, of these minings, when you would have, land erosion because of lack of environmental, protection. So these stories are not, told enough. And UNESCO is saying we must, tell these stories. And like I said, when we tell these stories, it's a wake-up call. Because if West African coastline is submerged, comes underwater, we all suffer for it. That is just the truth of the matter. Are we then going to run, everybody will move interland? That's in itself, is a danger. So for me, we need to tell, these, stories that affect the livelihood of our peoples. In the past, it used to be desert erosion that we used to talk about. Even that, we no longer, talk about it. So when we talk of food scarcity, when we talk of, all these problems, to what extent do we realize that this has to do with pollution, with climate change, that nothing is being done? Look at the weather in Nigeria in the past few months, past few weeks. It's been very, very hot. People are complaining, people cannot sleep, and so on and so forth. In some parts of the country, women are protesting that because of heat, their husbands are not moving near them and they are going to the streets. If you could say that is funny or bizarre, but it shows the reality of our existence. So it's a wake-up call. And for us on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day, the message to our government is that when we as journalists come around to ask questions about some of these things, about your projects, we ask about environmental impact assessment, we ask about whether in fact you really have a contingency plan, because it's gotten to a stage where government need to begin to declare state of emergency on the environment. And that when we do that, they should not just see us as busybodies, or that it's because we want to pull down the government of the day. It's because we are genuinely concerned, because it's like when you say the sky is going to collapse, like Yoruba used to say, it's not just about somebody's case, it's for all of us.
It is, I was just thinking in my head how significant it is then that Leila Salami Johnson asked that question, asked that question of the Minister of Works, Mr. Dave Umahi, as to whether or not they had an environmental impact assessment or whether an exemption had been granted. And on this particular part, when you look at just how important, given what it is that you have said, is, and all of the press conferences that will be holding later today, those are going to be organized by press bodies, and even that going to be held by the Ministers of Information and Environment. The importance of collaboration, to get voices, to make sure that these questions being asked are even louder, and that, the questions are not ignored, and that answers are provided. Cannot be swept under the carpet, cannot be underestimated. Would you say that we're saying enough of that on the part of journalists here in Nigeria and even media houses to ensure that when important questions are asked, given how, given the import and how significant the answers will be for everybody involved, that answers are actually provided?
Well, you see, I feel that we need to take collective actions. And the instance which we cited, the question asked the minister about environmental, impact assessment, now is a question that all of us, should be asking, so that it doesn't become the problem of that, journalists alone. But it's not just in relation to that. It's a question that we need to ask in all other spheres, because we're talking about attracting foreign investment, bringing foreign investment, and what are the implications of some of these things for our society. Now, we've also gotten to a stage where we believe we need to dialogue more with government, because there seems to be a lack of understanding of the important role of the media in a democracy. And if you are aware, over time, we've talked about the need for us to have a national mechanism on safety of journalists and press freedom, essentially for us to let those in government know that the way this thing works is that information is actually the oxygen of democracy. We know people who have left government and need the media to talk about their issues, particularly when they are facing alleged persecution or maybe prosecution by their alleged political enemies. These are quite important. What we want to see is for our leaders not to take offense when such questions are asked, and when they take offense, then let all of us begin to ask that question. One of the most one of the best films I ever watched is a film titled Spartacus. Which has to do with the revolt, the revolt by a slave led by Spartacus, who felt that he needed to break his chains. And at the point where they came for Spartacus, people gathered together and they were looking for him, and they were asking them and said, who is Spartacus? And each and every one of them in that film started standing up and said, I am Spartacus, I am Spartacus, I am Spartacus. Really, that is to the point that we are making. So we are that journalists that ask that question. because it's important for us, it's important for, for the country. So when things like this happen, we all should become, that person. If tomorrow Channels Television is legally shut down by NBC, then we should all rise up and say, we are Channels TV. We're saying that because, we are the media, and we feel that, we are increasingly, are endangered. But we hope there will be some understanding, and media organizations are initiating all forms of initiatives that will bring us together with government, and hopefully one day we will have in this country either a national mechanism or a national policy on safety of journalists and press freedom that provides a comprehensive enlightenment on the roles and responsibilities that we all have to play to ensure that at the end of the day, the citizens are able to get the kind of information with which they can make informed choices. That is why we're talking about this environment. Our role now is to provide that information, to prepare the people, to know what they need to do, to also know their own, responsibilities, because almost everything we do is about, the environment. So tomorrow we may decide to call our government. For example, look at Kenya. In Kenya, you don't just use plastic anyhow. They've gone far. I discovered that through a book I just reviewed, when the spirits tell you your name, by Wale Bakari, who is a widely traveled, safety trainer, who talked about the fact that if you go to Kenya and you just pick a plastic bottle, you could be liable. But look at our environment. Everybody, we don't plastics are clogged, not just our drainages, but even our seaways. So these are things we need to talk about. And unfortunately, the answers to most of our questions would have to come from the people in government. They should be prepared, and they should not take offense when such questions are asked.
It is interesting that you say that we have to sit with governments, or that we have to sit with our own government for them to understand the importance of the media to democracy. I do not know if that is what will be needed across the world, because from what we hear from Reporters Without Borders, who measure the index of freedom or press freedom, they see that press freedom is worsening in spite of the fact that democratic frontiers are increasing, and that's, for some people, it's very questionable. Do we really have a democracy? Because how can you have a democracy without free media? Are you really saying that those who operate within a democracy are not aware of the import or the importance of having a free media, a truly free media within a democracy?
Well, I think their behavior suggests that they're either not aware or pretend not to be aware, or perhaps that it's something in government that makes people to change their attitude. Now, I understand your question very well. And the truth of the matter is that we do all these things. We're going to release figures today. We release data. In the past 1 year, in 2023, the International Press Center must have issued over 30 press releases condemning attacks on journalists. Now, those who do this also, give their own, reasons one way or the other, most of which are never acceptable to us. But we are operating under important frameworks, particularly that of the United Nations, that talks about the 3 Ps when it comes to, journalism. Talks about, protection, talks about, prosecution and prevention. So we're looking at these 3 Ps. Now, when you look at these 3 Ps, there's no way they can come into reality in the Nigerian society if we do not have, the government side. And in some, parts of the world, mechanisms have actually been put in place, to protect, press freedom. And to that extent, we can't run away from engagement with the parliament, the National Assembly, and even the executives. Our own reasoning is that if we have, this kind, of dialogue, perhaps we may be able to enlighten them, better and commit them, because already they are actually committed, but they are not living to that expectation. I mean, the African Charter on Peoples and Human Rights provides for press freedom and freedom of expression. And Nigeria, in fact, that it's actually part of our law, as the likes of Femi Falana or Chief of Nigeria, will tell you. So they are obligated. Even ECOWAS has protocols that talk about the need for press freedom and freedom of expression, but we still then have these problem. And so to that extent, we just felt that let us see what we can do. The Constitution itself needs to be strengthened. We do not have express provision for press freedom in our constitution, like we have it in a jurisdiction like Ghana. In Ghana, the constitution insulates the state or government media from the control of the government of the day, because the government is not allowed to appoint the editors or the manager of those institutions. We need to also, fight within this space for some of these things. And truly, we cannot run away, from, having that kind of engagement if it does not lead to the goal we are pursuing, which is the goal of, a framework, a national policy or mechanism on the safety and protection of press freedom. Then it will be clearer to everybody that, our governments are not, prepared. If it leads to what we want, then it also means that we are perhaps, making, some progress, and nobody would accuse us of just only interested in, attacking the government, in condemning the government, without, trying to look at what can be done within, frameworks that are legitimate or even constitutional. So that is the point that, we are making. They do not need to be told, really, because this is a democracy. And they swear to oath. The oath is to protect the Constitution. The Constitution provides for freedom of expression. So in reality, I agree with you. Yeah. Nobody in government should be told that it's wrong for you to go and pick a journalist and use your power to throw him into detention without following the due process of law. When those things happen, we challenge them, go to court. And you are aware that there's been a number of some victories, even court orders calling on government to reopen investigations to killing of journalists. It's not as if we are surrendering. We will continue to fight on all those fronts, but more importantly, we're also saying that, look, let's see whether some, other forms.
Mr. Ogunade, if you can still hear me, I'd like to take you back to something that you started to talk about when my colleagues were talking with you earlier. You talked about illegal mining. You talked about one or two other things. And it is what many people do not know that the United Nations regards as environmental crimes. Environmental crimes have been, put into 5 specific catchments: wildlife crimes, illegal mining, pollution crimes, illegal fishing, illegal logging. When we talk about crimes generally, talking about corruption generally, our attention rarely goes to environmental crimes or environmental corruption. Is that, how significant would you say that has been in the cause of saving or protecting the planet? The fact that we haven't given it enough attention, maybe even as pressmen.
Well, it's quite significant. You talk about environmental, crime, but there's also environmental justice. That is justice for those, fighting for the environment. Because what we've discovered is that those who take up the cause of the environment also face the wrath of the governments, of some governments. Don't forget that the only offense that the likes of Ken Saro-Wiwa committed was that they were fighting for the end of pollution in Ogoniland, among others, that led them to talk about the right to self-determination.
The challenge there, Mr. Ogunade, that is of course definitely appreciated, and it's something we can also talk about. Just a second.
We have not really done enough. Yes. Because all these 5 areas that you have identified, our responsibility as media now is to begin to look at this. And to the extent that it's a United Nations something, Nigeria is part of United Nations. Each year, our leaders go to the United Nations General Assembly. So when it comes to that, those are the kind of questions we need to ask them.
But the challenge I'm trying to draw attention to, my apologies, Mr. Ogunade, the fact that I'm trying to draw attention to is the fact that they're not even considered environmental crimes. I don't know how many times the Federal Ministry of Solid Minerals under Mr. Alake now has talked about the fact that illegal mining is a terrible, horrible thing that is going on, and it's almost as if it's kind of insulated. Some governors complain about illegal mining, and these things seem like, they're just things we talk about from here here and there. Talk about illegal logging. I don't know the number of times we've heard the fact that it is because of illegal logging that certain kinds of floodings in certain communities and areas have gone on. The fact that we are not even aware is one thing. The fact that we have spokespersons of these people who are supposed to be our colleagues representing, supposedly representing their principles, who are expected to know these things, do not know them. How do we circumvent that? I'm not placing it as a problem for the media, but the fact that they're not even aware, that's a problem.
So this is why this conversation then becomes very important. Remember, the first point I made when I started this conversation was the fact that looking at the themes of this year's World Press Freedom Day, that first is a wake-up call for us, to do more, because it then means that even as media now, based on this theme, we need to look into all these issues. Some of these things you raised, and then go from there to now ask questions that if this is supposed to be a crime, what exactly is our government doing about it beyond lamentation? Would also be that along the line there are collusions, because who gives these people the right or the licenses or the permission to enter our forest and begin to fell all our trees, causing flooding, like you said. So we now need to ask questions. And what we're saying now is that going from this World Press Freedom Day, when we come around to ask this question, they must be prepared to provide answers, because our interest is to save the environment. The dimensions of environmental crises are perhaps better imagined, and quite frankly, we need to do more. So I'm not saying that those things are not crimes; they are. But then, do we have legislations that treat them, as crimes? These are very, important questions, and I just hope that, as media organizations, we recognize the important role that we need to play in this process.
Okay. Well, two issues that I want to quickly raise with you. Now, there is hardly a state in Nigeria that doesn't have some kind of development master plan, and some of these master plans usually have allocations for wetlands, for forest reserves, and the rest of them. But what we have found out over time is that sometimes some government officials, or maybe even the governments themselves, go and erode their own plans, or maybe in the interest of whatever, rewrite these plans for some kind of favors or the other. Now, how do we protect the environment, not just through policies, but through development plans, to ensure that areas that should not be developed are not developed in the interest not just of the environment, but of the people in those environments? Because if those environments are eroded, then the ecological balance of humanity itself is distorted. So how do we ensure that the states, when they come up with development plans, they actually have environments where they protect the environment, the areas where they protect the environment, and those things are insulated even from any kind of erosion by whoever comes into power?
I would say, on this question, I would say that first, we have to have those development plans made public. And this is where journalists can make use of instruments like Freedom of Information Act, to know what these plans are, because it's not supposed to be an exclusive monopoly of those in government. There must be public knowledge. It is when we have those plans that we can then ask relevant questions, talk to experts on the environment, and see to what extent, and where there are alterations to those plans, we must also seek explanations for them. Because what I see over time is that when you see governments go to do demolitions, they will tell you that, well, people are constituting themselves to nuisance, they are building on areas where they should not build. And in a lot of times, you are not even sure whether that exactly is the case. So truly, you have all those development plans or even master plans, but there has to be publicity about them. There has to be public enlightenment about those plans, so that you do not come around and blame citizens for doing what they are not supposed to do. And when you have these things happen, again, questions have to be asked. Who gave all those approvals? This don't just happen in this country. So there's a lot of accountability issues around issues of master plan and around the environment that I feel that requires the engagement of the media at this point in time.
We have to thank you for talking to us this morning, Larry Arogoda, the Executive Director, International Press Center, on this occasion of World Press Freedom Day, the planet for the environment and journalism in the face of environmental challenges. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, and happy World Press Freedom Day.
Thank you.
To you, our colleagues there at Channels Television, thank you for the good work that you do.
Thank you. And we'll extend that to all our colleagues as well.